Imagine a world without misunderstanding, without confusion, where every thought, every dream, every idea could be shared instantly and perfectly with anyone, anywhere. A world where humanity stood as one, united not just by a common goal, but by a single, seamless voice. This wasn't some distant, speculative future, according to an ancient story. This was our past. And then, in a single, pivotal moment, it all came crashing down. We know this story as the Tower of Babel, a tale often reduced to a simple fable about why we speak different languages. But what if I told you that this ancient text holds secrets far more profound, layers of meaning that reach into the very heart of human power, ambition, and control? This isn't just a story about words, it's a story about us. The Tower of Babel represents one of history's greatest and most enduring mysteries, a narrative that has captivated thinkers, artists, and leaders for millennia. It's a story that begins with a dazzling display of human collaboration, a united people building a city and a tower intended to scrape the heavens themselves. It's a vision of what we could achieve when we work together without barriers, but it ends in a divine intervention that fractures that unity, scattering people across the earth and confounding their speech. On the surface, it's about the origin of languages, but just beneath, it simmers with themes of rebellion, authority, and the terrifying power of a collective will. This was a political act, a celestial response to a human challenge, and its echoes are not confined to dusty ancient texts. They reverberate in our boardrooms, our governments, and our digital spaces today. So join me on a journey to unravel this mystery. We are going to peel back the layers of this story, one by one, to discover why a structure that never physically existed continues to tower over our collective imagination. We will explore how it reflects our timeless struggles for unity and our fears of division, how it questions who gets to control communication, and why that control is the ultimate form of power. This is more than a history lesson. It is a lens through which we can examine our modern world, our globalized networks, our digital echo chambers, and our ongoing quest to build our own towers, whatever they may be. This is the deep, hidden politics of the Tower of Babel, and it's a story that has been waiting for us to listen. Picture a sun-baked plain stretching to the horizon, a place called Shinar in the ancient world. Here, a people of one language and a common purpose gather, not merely to live, but to achieve something monumental. Their vision is staggering in its scope and its audacity. They are not just building a city, they are constructing a tower so immense, so impossibly high, that its peak intends to pierce the very heavens. This is the opening scene of one of the most potent stories ever told, a narrative that begins with the ultimate expression of human unity and ambition. The Book of Genesis presents this not as a slow evolution of society, but as a sudden, concentrated surge of collective will. They have a single voice and a singular, breathtaking goal. To understand the true weight of their endeavor, we must step back into their world. This story emerges from Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, a cradle of civilization famed for its incredible innovations. Here, cities like Ur and Babylon rose from the mud, and at their heart stood ziggurates. These were not simple buildings, they were massive, stepped pyramids of baked brick, towering over the flat landscape. They functioned as temples, as administrative centers, and most importantly, as literal bridges between the earth and the gods. A zigurate was a stairway to heaven, a physical place where the divine could descend and humanity could ascend. So when the people in Shinar said, "Let us build a tower with its top in the heavens," they were not speaking a vague metaphor. They were articulating a very real architectural and spiritual concept from their time. They were building their own Zigurate, but the biblical narrative imbues this project with a new and dangerous spirit. It becomes an act of defiance. The stated goal is to make a name for themselves to prevent their scattering across the earth. This reveals a profound shift in motive. This isn't about honoring a god or seeking divine favor. This is about cementing human legacy through human achievement alone. It is a declaration of independence from any higher authority, a statement that humanity, when perfectly united, needs nothing else. Their unity is their power, with everyone understanding each other perfectly. No project is too grand, no idea too complex. There is no room for misinterpretation, for bureaucratic delay, for the friction that naturally comes from differing perspectives. This flawless communication allows for an efficiency and a concentration of effort that is almost terrifying in its potential. What could humanity not accomplish if we were all truly on the same page? This is the core question the story poses, and it is a question that resonates with every massive human project throughout history. From the construction of the Great Pyramids, which required the coordination of thousands of workers, to the modern race to put people on Mars, we are constantly drawn to these colossal enterprises that test the limits of our collective ability. The Tower of Babel, in its genesis, represents the zenith of that impulse, the moment before the inevitable question is asked. At what point does ambition become arrogance? When does unity become uniformity? And when does the desire to achieve something great transform into a challenge against the natural or even the divine order of things? The foundation of this tower is laid not just in the clay of Shinar, but in the very essence of human nature itself. Now imagine the sheer power humming through that construction site in Shinar. Every shout from a foreman is instantly understood. Every instruction from an architect is perfectly executed. There is no need for translators, no room for costly misunderstandings. This seamless flow of words is the ultimate tool, the invisible mortar binding every brick and every person into a single, unstoppable force. Language in this perfect state is more than just communication. It is complete and total unity of thought and action. It is the difference between a crowd and an army, between a village and an empire. This incredible power is what makes the divine intervention so profound. The story tells us that God does not topple the tower with an earthquake or send a storm to scatter the people. Instead, the intervention is surgical, striking directly at the source of their strength. He confounds their language. Suddenly, the single, unifying thread that connected them all is snipped, and the entire tapestry of their society unravels. The very tool that built their unity instantly becomes the engine of their division. One moment, they are a cohesive whole. The next, they are fractured into confused, babbling groups, unable to coordinate or even comprehend one another. This is the first and most immediate layer of the Babel story, a brilliant exploration of language's dual nature. It is both our greatest bridge and our most formidable wall. Linguists like Noam Chomsky have explored how the structures of language don't just convey our thoughts, they actively shape them. The words available to us, the grammar we use, it all frames how we see the world. A shared language, therefore, creates a shared reality. It builds a communal mind, a culture. This is how language forges identity and fosters unimaginable collaboration. But this incredible power has a dark twin. Throughout history, those in power have understood that controlling language is a primary method of control. Think of imperial forces imposing their tongue on conquered peoples, making their native languages illegal or inferior. This isn't just about administrative efficiency. It is a deliberate act of cultural erasure, a way to dominate thought by dominating expression. By forcing a population to think and speak in the conqueror's language, you slowly overwrite their history, their stories, and their very identity. You create a hierarchy where one way of speaking is correct and another is primitive, effectively manufacturing division and enforcing power through vocabulary and grammar. We see softer, more subtle versions of this all around us, echoes of that post-Babel fragmentation. Every subculture develops its own slang, its own jargon. This creates a sense of belonging for those on the inside, a comforting shorthand that says, "You are one of us," but for those on the outside, it's a barrier. It's exclusionary. It creates confusion and separation. A doctor speaking in complex medical terms to a patient can create a power dynamic as real as any ancient king's decree. A tech worker using a flood of acronyms can make a newcomer feel lost and incompetent. These are modern miniature Babels where the failure to communicate doesn't scatter us across the globe, but it can isolate us in a room full of people. Now translate this to our digital spaces. Social media platforms promise global connection, a new universal language of memes and hashtags, and in some ways they deliver. But they also algorithmically sort us into echo chambers, where our own dialect of ideas is constantly reinforced, and any outside language is framed as foreign, hostile, or wrong. We find our tribe, our linguistic group, and we often end up staring in confusion and distrust at the other tribes, just like those scattered groups on the plains of Shinar, unable to find common ground. This ancient story holds up a mirror to our modern world, asking us a crucial question: are we using our words to build towers, or are we using them to build walls? The politics of this linguistic divide, this deliberate scattering, is where the story pulls us next. But this unified human ambition, this sheer force of collective will, is precisely what makes the project so threatening to the established order. The story reveals a divine observation, a moment of divine concern. God sees what they are building and essentially says, if they can accomplish this with one language, then nothing they imagine will be impossible for them. This isn't a statement about architectural limits. It is a profound political statement about power. It is the recognition that a truly united humanity, speaking with one voice and acting with one purpose, represents a potential challenge to any higher authority. Their ambition isn't merely to build a tower. It is to make a name for themselves, to create a self-sustaining center of power that operates entirely on its own terms, answerable to no one. This kind of unchecked, concentrated ambition has always made rulers nervous, whether they are earthly kings or celestial deities. Political philosophers have long wrestled with this very idea. Thomas Hobbes, in his seminal work Leviathan, described the state itself as a kind of artificial man, a massive entity created by a collective surrender of individual wills to a central authority. This Leviathan maintains order and prevents a war of all against all, but the Tower of Babel presents the reverse and in some ways more terrifying scenario. It is a Leviathan created from the bottom up, a collective will that did not surrender its power but instead pooled it, forming a new and independent power base that exists outside of any pre-existing control. From the perspective of any sitting authority, this is the ultimate disruption. It is a rival, and history shows us that rivals, especially those born from popular movements, are almost always met with a response designed to break their momentum and reassert control. We can see this pattern play out across human history. Consider the construction of the Great Pyramids of Giza. This was a monumental project that required the coordination of thousands of workers, a feat of collective ambition that still staggers the mind. But this effort was channeled and entirely directed by the divine authority of the pharaoh. It was a project that reinforced the existing power structure, glorifying the god-king. Now imagine if those same workers, with that same skill and determination, had decided to build something for themselves, a monument to their own collective achievement rather than to their ruler's glory. That would have been a direct challenge to Pharaoh's absolute power, and it would have been crushed without hesitation. The space race of the 20th century offers another fascinating parallel. When the Soviet Union and the United States poured immense national resources into reaching the moon, it was a collective endeavor on a massive scale. But it was also a project tightly controlled by rival governments, an extension of state power and Cold War politics. The fear was never the collective ambition itself. The fear was that the other side's collective ambition would surpass your own. The political intervention was not to stop the effort, but to win it. The true Babel moment occurs when collective ambition operates outside of these sanctioned channels. When a group's unified vision threatens to rewrite the rules of the game entirely. This is why movements, from labor unions organizing for better conditions to populist political groups seeking to overhaul a system, are so often met with intense resistance from those in power. Their unity is their strength, and that strength is seen as inherently destabilizing to the existing hierarchy. The intervention, much like in the ancient story, often aims to fracture that unity. It might not be a divine confounding of language. Instead, it might be a corporate strategy to break a strike by sowing discord among workers. It could be a political tactic to divide a voting bloc by emphasizing internal cultural differences. The method changes, but the principle remains timeless. A united group is powerful. A divided group is manageable. The politics of Babel are the politics of preventing any single human collective from becoming so powerful that it can operate with complete autonomy. This forces us to confront a difficult and enduring question about the very nature of collaboration. Is there a natural limit to how much humans can achieve together before that achievement itself becomes a threat to the delicate balance of our world? Our ambition to connect, to build, to reach ever higher may be our greatest trait, but the story suggests it is also the one that must be most carefully watched. Now consider the view from above, from a perspective entirely outside of human understanding. A deity observes the bustling plain of Shinar, not with petty anger, but with a profound, perhaps even necessary, concern for the natural order of things. The intervention in the Tower of Babel story is not a simple act of punishment. It is a deliberate act of boundary setting. The Supreme Being looks upon this unified human force and sees a potential that is destabilizing, a collective will that threatens to erase the fundamental distinction between the Creator and the created. By confounding their language and scattering them across the earth, this divine authority is not just stopping a construction project, it is enforcing a cosmic rule, reasserting a hierarchy that ensures the universe operates as intended. This is the core of the third layer, a deep exploration of power dynamics where intervention is framed not as cruelty, but as a maintenance of order. This theme of divine checkmates against human ambition is a universal thread running through the tapestries of world mythology. In ancient Greece, the Titan Prometheus is punished with eternal torment for the crime of giving fire, the symbol of knowledge and technology, to humanity. His gift elevated humans, granting them a power that made them more godlike, and for this transgression against the established order, Zeus unleashed his terrible wrath. Similarly, in the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, the hero's quest for immortality is ultimately blocked. He may be 2/3 God, but his 1/3 humanity places a hard limit on his aspirations, a boundary the gods will not allow him to cross. These stories are not merely entertaining fables. They are foundational narratives that taught ancient societies about their place in the cosmos. They reinforced a crucial social and political idea: that there are realms of ambition and power that are simply off limits, reserved for a higher authority. Scholars of religion point out that these myths often served a very practical purpose in reinforcing earthly power structures. If the gods themselves decree that overreach must be punished, then it becomes much easier for a king or a priesthood to justify their own supreme authority. They can position themselves as the intermediaries between the divine will and the mortal realm, the necessary governors who prevent chaos by ensuring everyone stays in their designated place. This divine justification for hierarchy has echoed through centuries of human governance. The concept of the divine right of kings in Europe argued that monarchs derived their authority directly from God, making rebellion not just a political crime, but a sin against the cosmic order itself. When we examine the motives behind this type of intervention, startling parallels emerge in our modern political systems. While we may not attribute our laws to Zeus or Yahweh, the mechanisms of control are often the same. Any movement, any collective action that fundamentally challenges the dominance of an established power structure is often met with a form of scattering. A government might use propaganda to create confusion and sow dissent within a protest movement, breaking its unity. A corporation might use legal and financial pressure to dismantle a unionizing effort. The tools are different, but the underlying principle is ancient, a political echo of that original divine intervention. It is the reassertion of control by a prevailing authority that feels threatened by a consolidated challenge from below. This forces us to confront a deeply reflective question about our own time. In an age of breathtaking innovation where artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and space commercialization accelerate at a dizzying pace, where do we, as a society, draw the line? What constitutes responsible innovation, and what is a potentially dangerous overreach that requires some form of check or boundary? The story of Babel suggests that the answer is not merely a technical one, but a profoundly political and ethical one. It is about who gets to decide those limits and whose interests are being protected when those boundaries are enforced. As we grapple with these monumental questions of authority and ambition, our attention naturally shifts to the very object at the center of the story, the tower itself, and what its bricks and mortar represented beyond mere architecture. That tower, reaching for the heavens, was far more than an impressive stack of bricks and mortar. It was a declaration carved into the sky itself, a physical manifesto of human ambition aimed at achieving immortality through stone. In the ancient world, structures of such immense scale were never just buildings. They were the ultimate symbols of urban concentration and the formidable power that flows from a centralized civilization. To understand this, we must look at the real-world inspiration for the Babel story, the great Zigurates of Mesopotamia. These colossal, stepped pyramids were the beating hearts of cities like Ur and Babylon. They functioned as both religious sanctuaries and administrative nerve centers. At the very top, a temple was believed to be the dwelling place of a god, creating a tangible connection between the divine and the earthly ruler who presided below. This was architecture as political theater, a daily, visible reminder that the authority of the king and the priests was sanctioned by the cosmos itself. By commanding the labor and resources to construct such a marvel, a ruler was not merely building a city, he was constructing a legacy, claiming dominion over the land, its people, and their shared identity. This language of power, written in stone and steel, is a constant throughout human history. Consider the Roman Colosseum, an immense arena built to host spectacles of entertainment and public execution. Its very design was a map of Roman society, with seating arrangements that rigidly enforced the social hierarchy from senators to slaves. The games themselves, paid for by emperors and elites, were a brutal demonstration of state control, showcasing the power to give life or death to both men and beasts, all while pacifying the population with bread and circuses. Centuries later, the great Gothic cathedrals of Europe pierced the skyline of every major town, their spires directing the eyes of the faithful heavenward. They communicated the immense wealth and influence of the Church, centralizing spiritual life and dominating the urban landscape in a way that no castle or palace ever could. Even today, our skyscrapers follow this ancient blueprint. The competition to build the world's tallest building is rarely just about providing office space. It is a modern-day version of Babel's ambition, a statement of economic dominance, national pride, and technological prowess from cities like Dubai and Shanghai. Experts in urban studies emphasize that city planning itself is rarely neutral. The layout of streets, the zoning of districts, and the placement of monumental structures are all deliberate choices that encode social and political values. Wide, grand boulevards carved through existing neighborhoods in cities like Paris or Brasilia were often designed to showcase state power, facilitate military control, and impose a new, centralized order upon the organic chaos of a growing populace. This is the implied stratification of the Babel story made real. Who gets to live in the center, who is pushed to the outskirts, which architecture is preserved and celebrated, and which is neglected. The answers to these questions tell us everything about who holds power. When we analyze the symbolism of the tower, we are forced to turn this lens on our own world. What do our own megastructures say about our societal values? The relentless vertical growth of financial districts speaks to the power of global capital. The sprawling, sealed complexes of tech campuses reflect a new kind of insulated corporate sovereignty. Even the design of our digital spaces, the platforms where we now congregate, can be seen as modern ziggurates. They are centralized architectures that control the flow of information, influence our behavior, and create new forms of social hierarchy, often governed by algorithms instead of kings. This architectural ambition, whether physical or virtual, continues to define, unite, and inevitably to divide us, setting the stage for the profound human consequences that would follow its disruption. Imagine the profound disorientation of that moment, a single breath where the world you knew fractures into 1,000 pieces. One instant, you are part of a massive, coordinated effort, your voice blending with thousands of others in a shared purpose. The next, the sounds coming from your neighbors' mouths are a chaotic and incomprehensible noise. The unity that built the tower is shattered, replaced by a primal panic. This is the scattering, a forced and sudden diaspora where the basic tool of human cooperation, language, becomes the very reason for separation. People who were neighbors and colleagues mere moments before now cluster frantically with the few who still sound familiar, looking upon other groups not as fellow builders but as alien and potentially threatening strangers. This rupture is far more than a simple relocation. It is a foundational trauma that reshapes the entire course of human society, setting in motion forces of both incredible cultural creativity and devastating, millennia-long conflict. The immediate sociopolitical consequence is the birth of new identities forged in the crucible of isolation. As these scattered groups migrate to different corners of the world, their new languages begin to evolve in unique directions, influenced by local environments, challenges, and experiences. Over generations, these linguistic seeds grow into full-fledged cultures, each with its own myths, traditions, and ways of seeing the world. This is the beautiful, unintended gift of Babel, the astonishing diversity of human expression. The thousands of languages and cultures that enrich our planet today can be traced back to this primordial fragmentation. Yet, this same process also plants the seeds of division. With unique languages come unique identities, and with unique identities often comes a sense of distinction from and sometimes superiority over others. The potential for misunderstanding skyrockets, and the simple act of communication across groups becomes a political challenge. Territorial disputes naturally arise as migrating groups settle new lands, claiming them for their own newfound tribes and establishing boundaries where none existed before. This pattern of scattering and its dual-edged impact echoes throughout human history. Consider the Jewish diaspora, a series of dispersions from the ancient homeland that saw Jewish communities spread across the globe. This scattering preserved a strong cultural and religious identity through language, scripture, and tradition, leading to immense contributions in philosophy, science, and art within their host societies. Yet it also made them perpetual outsiders in many lands, often leading to persecution, pogroms, and prejudice born from cultural and religious differences. Similarly, the colonial expansions of European powers from the 15th century onward forced a brutal scattering upon indigenous populations across the Americas, Africa, and Australia. Native peoples were displaced from their lands, their languages and cultures systematically suppressed, leading to profound social disintegration and loss. Meanwhile, the colonizers themselves formed new, rigid national identities in these conquered territories, often defined in opposition to the original inhabitants, creating political structures of exclusion that continue to cause conflict today. Political scientist Benedict Anderson explored this phenomenon brilliantly through his concept of imagined communities. He argued that nations are not ancient, natural formations but are socially constructed. They are imagined because the members of even the smallest nation will never know most of their fellow members, yet in each of their minds lives the image of their communion. The scattering at Babel is the ultimate catalyst for this imagination. When physical unity is broken, groups must forge new bonds not based on daily interaction but on shared language, shared stories, and a shared sense of destiny. A common tongue becomes the most powerful tool for building this national consciousness, creating a sense of us that is inherently defined by a them who speak differently. This is how division leads to innovation in political organization, giving rise to the nation-state model that dominates our modern world. But this same process can just as easily fuel nationalism, xenophobia, and warfare as groups retreat behind linguistic and cultural walls, viewing others with suspicion. So what can this ancient narrative teach us about our world of constant migration and globalization? Today, we are experiencing a new kind of scattering, not from a single point but from countless points, as people move across the planet seeking safety, opportunity, or simply a better life. Our cities are becoming modern Babels, mosaics of languages and cultures living in close proximity. This brings the same ancient potential for both incredible richness and tense conflict. The challenge becomes whether we choose to see our differences as a reason for division or as an opportunity for learning and synthesis. How do we manage this diversity without forcing a false unity that erases unique identities? The story suggests that the answer is not found in building a new tower to heaven, a single global culture that dominates all others. Instead, it might be found in the hard, humble work of translation, of building bridges of understanding between our many unique and beautiful towers, ensuring that our scattered world does not become a divided one. To truly grasp the revolutionary meaning behind the Tower of Babel, we must transport ourselves to the sun-baked mud-brick plains of ancient Mesopotamia. This was a world where human ambition was etched into the very skyline by towering ziggurats, massive stepped pyramids that served as both temples and statements of power. For the Babylonians, a ziggurat was not merely a building. It was a sacred portal, a man-made mountain designed to bridge the gap between the earthly realm and the divine. a physical declaration that their king, their city, and their gods were supreme. The biblical story of Babel is almost certainly a direct echo of one such structure, the great Etymananke Zigurate in Babylon, dedicated to their patron god Marduk. This was the epicenter of a vast, expansionist empire, a place where cultural and religious hegemony was enforced, and the idea of a single, unified language under a single ruler was a political reality, not a mythical dream. When we place the Babel narrative into this specific historical soil, its meaning transforms from a simple fable into a powerful act of theological and political resistance. For the Israelites who endured exile and subjugation under Babylonian rule, this story was a defiant subversion of their oppressors' most potent symbols. The Babylonians built their towering ziggurat to celebrate Marduk's supremacy and their king's divine right to rule. The Israelite authors retold the story to say that such prideful ambition, such an attempt to storm the heavens and make a name for oneself, was not celebrated by the one true God, it was punished. Their monotheistic world directly challenged the polytheistic chaos of the Mesopotamian pantheon, while texts like the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, depicted Marduk achieving dominance through a violent cosmic battle. The Genesis account presented a singular, omnipotent God who needed no such struggle. He simply spoke and the world came into being. His response to the tower was not a fight, but a simple, effortless act of fragmentation that reasserted the proper order. This was a brilliant piece of political commentary woven into a sacred text. By recasting the Babylonian symbol of unity and power as an act of hubris that led to division and scattering, the Israelite authors were engaging in a form of narrative resistance. They were essentially saying, your great tower is not a monument to glory, but a testament to arrogance. Your empire's unity is an illusion that our God can shatter in an instant. This was how a displaced and seemingly powerless people could reclaim their identity and assert their theological superiority over their mighty captors. The story became a tool for strengthening cultural identity, a way to ensure that while they lived in Babylon, they would not become Babylonians. It reinforced the boundaries of their faith and community in the face of overwhelming assimilative pressure. Religious scholar Karen Armstrong has often emphasized that ancient stories are rarely just stories. They are vessels for preserving history, encoding trauma, and wrestling with contemporary political struggles. The Tower of Babel is a prime example of this. It captures the experience of a people watching a foreign empire consolidate its power and impose its culture, and it offers a profound critique of that centralized, homogenizing force. It asks a timeless question, one that resonates deeply in our own era of globalized culture and corporate dominance. Who gets to control the narrative? Whose language defines reality? The ancient Israelites used this story to answer boldly that true authority comes not from towering monuments or imperial decrees, but from a God who values humble faith over proud ambition. This contextual reading reveals Babel not as a punishment for communication itself, but as a divine dismantling of a specific kind of oppressive political unity, making way for a different, more diverse, and ultimately more human world. Yet from that moment of divine intervention, something beautiful and profoundly human began to emerge. The very confusion that scattered peoples across the earth became the fertile ground for a breathtaking cultural mosaic. Each new language that sprouted from the soil of Babel was not merely a set of words and rules. It was a living, breathing vessel. It carried within it an entire universe of tradition, a unique mythology, a distinct way of seeing and describing the world. What was first perceived as a punishment, a fracturing of human potential, slowly revealed itself to be the very engine of our cultural and creative diversity. A single, unified language might have built one tower, but thousands of different languages built thousands of different civilizations, each adapting to its environment in astonishingly unique ways. Consider how a language evolves to mirror the world its speakers inhabit. The Inuit languages, for example, are famously noted for their nuanced vocabulary for snow and ice, describing specific conditions critical for survival and travel in the Arctic. This isn't just a long list of synonyms, it represents a deep, granular understanding of their environment, encoded directly into their communication. Conversely, the Tsimain people of the Bolivian Amazon have been studied by linguists and psychologists for their limited number of color terms, which reflects a different yet equally rich perceptual engagement with their lush green world. Languages also codify social structures. The complex system of honorifics in Japanese or Korean, for instance, embeds respect and social hierarchy into the very grammar, reinforcing cultural values of deference and community harmony with every sentence spoken. This linguistic diversity is a treasure trove of human thought. The esteemed linguist David Crystal often champions the immense value of multilingualism, arguing that each language we learn offers a new lens through which to view reality. It's not just about ordering food in a different country. It's about gaining cognitive flexibility, the ability to think in new patterns and understand perspectives that a monolingual mind might never access. A language holds the stories, the jokes, the lullabies, and the wisdom of its people. When a language goes extinct, which is happening at an alarming rate across the globe, it isn't just a vocabulary that disappears. It is an entire library of human experience that closes its doors forever. We lose unique solutions to problems, philosophical concepts with no direct translation, and artistic expressions that can never be fully replicated. This brings us to the complex and often painful politics of language preservation. The very same forces of globalization that connect us also exert a powerful homogenizing pressure. English has undeniably become the world's current lingua franca, the dominant language of business, science, and the internet. While this facilitates communication on a massive scale, it also creates a steep gradient where smaller, regional languages struggle to survive. Children might prioritize learning global English over their ancestral tongue, seeing the latter as less useful for economic advancement. Governments sometimes impose a single national language to foster unity, but in doing so, they can inadvertently marginalize minority languages and the cultures they represent. The struggle to revitalize languages like Welsh in Britain or Hawaiian in the United States is a fight against this tide, a conscious effort to reclaim identity and preserve a unique world view from being washed away. So we are left with a poignant duality born from the Babel story. The fragmentation forced upon humanity also gifted us with a spectacular spectrum of cultural expression. It is a legacy of both division and dazzling creativity. This makes the choice before us a modern one. Will we allow the tower's shadow to loom over us as a story of pure punishment and separation? Or can we reframe it as the origin point of our beautifully diverse human family? Can we appreciate the incredible mosaic of languages not as a barrier to overcome, but as a heritage to cherish and protect? What stories are held in the language your grandparents spoke that you might not understand? And what might we all lose if we allow any piece of this magnificent, fractured mosaic to fade away? Now, fast forward to our current moment, where the dream of a united global village has been reborn in silicon and fiber optic cables. The Internet, in its most idealistic form, represents a new digital Tower of Babel, a structure built not from brick and tar, but from data and code, promising to connect every human being instantly across any language or border. With a few clicks, we can video chat with someone on the opposite side of the planet, access the collective knowledge of our species, and collaborate on projects of unimaginable scale. It feels like we are finally reversing the ancient scattering, weaving the threads of humanity back into a single, vibrant tapestry of communication. Yet this shimmering digital tower is already showing cracks, and the age-old political tensions of control and division are erupting within its very foundation. Just as in the ancient story, powerful entities are vying to control this new flow of information. Tech giants act as the modern architects and gatekeepers, curating what we see through complex algorithms that decide which voices are amplified and which are silenced. Governments, in turn, assert their sovereignty over this digital realm, creating borders in a space that was supposed to be borderless. This is not merely about convenience or connectivity. It is a raw and potent struggle for power, echoing the divine intervention at Babel, but now played out in corporate boardrooms and legislative halls. This struggle manifests in ways that feel eerily familiar. Social media platforms designed to bring us together often achieve the opposite. Their algorithms, optimized for engagement, inadvertently build immense echo chambers that reinforce our existing beliefs and shield us from challenging perspectives. We find ourselves clustered with those who speak our ideological language, while those outside our group become incomprehensible strangers, even enemies. This digital confounding of speech doesn't use different languages, but different sets of facts and narratives, leading to a profound and often hostile confusion that paralyzes public discourse. Misinformation spreads like a virus because a lie that aligns with a group's worldview is often more engaging than a complex truth from outside it. We can see clear case studies in how political entities manage this new communication landscape. The European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, is a monumental effort to assert citizen control over personal data, creating a unified legal framework to protect individuals from the unchecked power of data-hungry corporations. It is a legislative attempt to build guardrails on the digital tower. On the other end of the spectrum, China's Great Firewall is a stark example of a government constructing a massive digital barrier, not just to confound speech but to prevent it entirely, isolating its population from global information flows to maintain internal control and social stability. Both are responses to the same problem, the concentration of communicative power, but with vastly different philosophies and outcomes. Tech ethicists like Tristan Harris, formerly of Google, warn us of the risks. He argues that these centralized digital infrastructures are creating a society-wide loss of agency, where our attention is manipulated and our choices are subtly guided by systems we do not understand or control. We are building a new tower, but one where we are not the masters of our own creation. The stakes could not be higher. Control over communication means influence over what people know, what they believe, and ultimately how they act. It shapes elections, sways markets, and can ignite or quell social movements. So we are left with a pressing, modern question that mirrors the ancient parable. Is this digital technology truly unifying us, or is it secretly deepening our divisions under the illusion of connection? The answer is likely both, existing in a constant and tense balance. The challenge before us is to navigate these politics consciously, to demand transparency from our digital architects, and to champion tools and policies that foster genuine understanding rather than algorithmic agitation. The story of Babel teaches us that the scattering led to both beautiful diversity and painful division. Our task is to learn from that history, ensuring our new tower builds toward the former without succumbing to the latter. Picture the profound disorientation in those first moments after the divine intervention. as the familiar sounds of a shared tongue dissolved into a cacophony of unfamiliar syllables. In that instant, the world shrank and then violently expanded. The builders, once united by a common purpose and a single language, now found themselves adrift in a sea of confusion. Instinctively, they did what humans have always done in the face of the unknown. They clustered together with those whose speech they could understand. These new, smaller groups became islands of safety in a suddenly incomprehensible world. This powerful human tendency to form in groups and outgroups is not just a social behavior, it is a fundamental part of our psychological wiring, a survival mechanism amplified to its extreme by the event at Babel. Social psychology offers a powerful lens through which to view this fragmentation. The seminal work of psychologist Henry Tadgeful and his social identity theory helps us understand what happened next. The theory posits that a significant part of our self-concept and self-esteem is derived from the groups we belong to. We naturally categorize people into us and them, and in order to boost our own group status, we often favor members of our in-group while discriminating against those in the out-group. What is most startling and most relevant to Babel is Tadgeful's finding that this bias emerges even when the group distinctions are completely arbitrary and meaningless, like being assigned to a group based on a coin toss. If such trivial distinctions can trigger discrimination, imagine the powerful and immediate walls that would have been erected by the profound, visceral barrier of mutually unintelligible language. You are no longer just a fellow builder, you are one of us who speaks this way, and they are the others who speak that way. We can see this us versus them mentality reinforced by linguistic division throughout history. In the ancient world, the Greeks famously referred to anyone who didn't speak Greek as barbaroi, a term meant to mimic the sound of what they perceived as nonsensical babbling, giving us the word barbarian. This linguistic label instantly dehumanized entire cultures, marking them as uncivilized and other. Fast forward to the rise of modern nationalism, where the establishment of a standardized national language was often a key tool for unifying a population under a single identity, while simultaneously creating a clear line between citizens and foreigners. A shared language becomes a powerful symbol of belonging, and a different language becomes an immediate marker of difference, a trigger for suspicion or prejudice that can be exploited for political gain. Yet, the story does not have to end with division. Understanding this psychology is the first step toward overcoming it. Initiatives that promote multilingual education and immersive cultural exchange are powerful antidotes to this innate tribalism. When we learn another language, we do more than acquire a new skill. We gain a window into another culture's soul, its unique ways of thinking, its humor, and its values. Programs like student exchange trips or international professional collaborations force us to step outside of our comfortable in-groups and navigate the world from a different perspective. This process builds cognitive flexibility and, more importantly, empathy. It teaches us that the stranger's speech is not mere noise, but a complex system of meaning, and that the person speaking it is not a threat, but a potential partner. This brings us to a deeply personal reflection. Each of us in our own lives operates within a series of in-groups, whether based on our profession, our hobbies, our political views, or even the neighborhoods we live in. We develop our own jargon and shared assumptions that can unintentionally exclude others. Think about the last time you heard a conversation full of acronyms and insider references that made you feel like an outsider. Now consider the subtle ways you might do the same within your own circles. The challenge, then, is to become aware of these psychological boundaries we create and to consciously work to bridge them. How can we actively seek out perspectives that differ from our own? How can we practice translating our ideas into language that is inclusive and accessible rather than exclusionary? The Tower of Babel is not just an ancient myth, it is a mirror reflecting our own daily struggles with connection and misunderstanding, urging us to build bridges where we have so often built walls. But this scattering of languages, this divine act of fragmentation, forces us to confront one of the most profound and enduring questions woven into the human experience. What is the nature of our freedom when measured against a power that can reshape our entire world with a word? The story of Babel is not merely a historical or political allegory. It is a deep theological puzzle that probes the relationship between human ambition and divine authority, between our free will and what some might call destiny. At its heart, we are left to wonder about the character of a deity who, witnessing the pinnacle of human cooperation and achievement, chooses to interrupt it. If the divine is truly benevolent, why would it halt progress, sow confusion, and fracture a united humanity? This is not an act of simple punishment in the Old Testament sense, like the flood that wiped away corruption. Here, the transgression is more nuanced. It is the sin of overreach, of hubris, of seeking to make a name for themselves that might challenge the divine name. Different faith traditions have wrestled with this question for millennia, each offering a unique lens to understand God's motives. In Jewish midrashic commentaries, scholars often frame the event not as a cruel punishment but as a necessary corrective. The builders' unity was not for a holy purpose but for a selfish one, to build a tower into the heavens so they could wage war against God himself. The confounding of their speech, in this view, was an act of mercy, a way to prevent them from collectively embarking on a path of self-destruction and blasphemy that would have doomed them all. Christian theologians like St. Augustine saw in Babel a demonstration of divine omnipotence and a lesson on the proper order of the universe. Augustine argued that human society, when left to its own devices and inflated with pride, will inevitably turn away from God. The scattering was a forced humility, a way to remind humanity of its rightful place within the created order and to ultimately pave the way for a true, God-centered unity that would come later through the Church. Islamic tradition, while not detailing the Tower of Babel in the Quran, contains echoes of its themes in the belief that Allah allows nations to rise and fall, and that linguistic and cultural diversity is itself a sign of God's creative power for those who reflect. The motive shifts from curbing a specific threat to a broader assertion of divine will and a test of faith for dispersed peoples. These interpretations all grapple with a central tension: how to reconcile our all-powerful, all-knowing God with the genuine autonomy of human beings. If God knew the builders would aspire to such heights and planned to stop them, were they ever truly free? This ancient debate finds a powerful case study in Babel. Modern theologians might suggest that divine foreknowledge does not equate to divine micromanagement, that God's intervention was a response to a free choice, not the negation of choice itself. The human agency was in the building, the divine agency was in the response. This conversation effortlessly bridges into secular philosophy, where the same core conflict plays out without a divine actor. Existentialist thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre would argue that the external constraints imposed at Babel, whether from God or society, do not ultimately erase human freedom. Instead, they define the situation in which we must exercise our agency. For Sartre, we are condemned to be free, meaning we are always responsible for forging our meaning and making choices within the circumstances we are given, even oppressive ones. The post-Babel humans were not stripped of their free will. They were presented with a new, more difficult set of constraints within which to exercise it. They had to choose how to respond to the confusion, whether to succumb to fear and tribalism or to begin the slow, arduous process of building new connections across the new divides. This philosophical angle invites us to consider the constraints in our own lives, the societal structures, the economic pressures, the cultural norms that feel as immutable and confounding as a divine decree. The question shifts from "why did this happen to me?" to "what will I do now that it has?" So where does this leave us in our own beliefs? Do we see the limits placed upon us, the Babels we encounter in the form of personal setbacks or systemic obstacles, as arbitrary punishments that destroy our freedom? Or do we see them as the very field upon which our freedom is tested and proven, the raw material from which we must build our own towers of meaning and connection? The story refuses to give easy answers, and that is its enduring power. It transcends its ancient roots to hold up a mirror, asking each of us to contemplate the nature of our own agency in a world that often seems designed to confuse and divide us. That towering ambition to reach the heavens is perhaps the most classic and enduring symbol in the entire story. It represents the very essence of hubris, that dangerous cocktail of excessive pride and overconfidence that tempts humanity to challenge the established order, whether it is natural or divine. The builders of Babel did not just want to construct a tall building. They wanted to make a name for themselves that would echo through the ages, to create a monument so grand it would prevent their scattering and essentially allow them to rival the divine realm itself. This is the core of the cautionary tale, a warning echoed across countless cultures and myths. Think of Icarus, whose waxen wings melted when he flew too close to the sun, ignoring his father's warnings. Or consider the tragic figure of Dr. Frankenstein, who in Mary Shelley's seminal novel sought to conquer death itself by creating new life, only to be destroyed by the monstrous consequences of his own godlike ambition. These stories all revolve around a central, terrifying idea that there are boundaries which mortals cross at their ultimate peril. This ancient warning is not confined to dusty old books. It plays out on the front pages of our news every single day. Modern corporate scandals like the collapse of Enron were born from a similar kind of fiscal hubris, a belief that complex financial instruments could defy economic gravity and that the executives were too clever to ever face consequences. On a global scale, our exploitation of the environment presents a stark, real-world parallel. Our technological innovation has given us the power to reshape continents, alter the very climate of our planet, and engineer new forms of life, yet this power has far outpaced our collective wisdom and ethical considerations. We are, in a very real sense, playing with forces we do not fully understand or control, much like Victor Frankenstein or the architects of the tower. Experts in ethics consistently warn that without humility and a profound sense of responsibility, our greatest innovations could lead to our most devastating downfalls. So how do we navigate this? How do we, as a species, continue to reach for the stars without succumbing to the fate of Babel's builders? The lesson is not to abandon ambition or progress, but to temper it with wisdom. It is to build checks and balances into our systems, to prioritize sustainability over short-term gain, and to constantly ask ourselves not just if we can do something, but if we should. It requires a deep respect for the complex systems of our world and an acknowledgement that our knowledge, however vast, will always have its limits. The story of the tower challenges us to pursue progress with a dose of humility, recognizing that true greatness lies not in unchecked conquest, but in harmonious advancement. This metaphorical lens transforms the ancient narrative into a vital guide for our modern technological and scientific frontiers, from artificial intelligence to genetic engineering. It prepares us to see how this powerful theme of ambition and its consequences has been explored and reinterpreted through the profound medium of art. Now let us step into that grand gallery of the human imagination, where the Tower of Babel has been endlessly rebuilt and reimagined. Perhaps no single image is more iconic than Pieter Bruegel the Elder's 1663 painting, which presents the tower not as a sleek spire but as a colossal, crumbling mountain of stone, swarming with tiny, determined figures. Bruegel's masterpiece is a breathtaking commentary on sheer human industry, but also on its potential folly. The architecture is impossibly vast and complex, yet it is also visibly flawed, already decaying even as it reaches for the cloud. This visual paradox captures the entire spirit of the myth, the glorious and terrifying simultaneity of our ambition and our inevitable shortcomings. The painting is a mirror held up to 16th century Europe, reflecting its anxieties about empire, technological change, and the social upheaval of the Renaissance. It asks a silent, powerful question that still resonates. Are we building a monument to our genius or a tomb for our hubris? Centuries later, the Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges would approach the tower not THROUGH, Chinese letter, 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 weaving it into his labyrinthine short story, The Library of Babel. In Borges's universe, the entire cosmos is an infinite library containing every possible book, a concept that is both a promise of ultimate knowledge and a prison of utter nonsense. This is a philosophical reinterpretation of the ancient confusion, where the frustration is not a lack of language, but a paralyzing overabundance of meaningless information. The inhabitants of the library are lost in a wilderness of gibberish, desperately searching for a single book of truth amidst the chaos. Borges, writing in the early 20th century, seems to predict our own modern digital age, where we are drowned in data yet often starved for wisdom, endlessly scrolling through a modern-day Babel of our own creation. The theme translates powerfully into sound as well. Composers have used music to express the tower's chaotic collapse. Imagine an orchestra where each section plays in a different key and time signature, a controlled cacophony of clashing notes that represents the sudden, profound rupture of understanding between people. This musical dissonance is a direct auditory metaphor for the psychological and social disorientation described in the biblical story. In the realm of science fiction, the premise becomes a potent plot device. Countless stories and films explore what happens when humanity's tools for connection, from universal translators to planetary communication networks, spectacularly fail. These narratives tap into a deep-seated anxiety that our own technological towers, our global digital infrastructure, could succumb to a similar breakdown, leaving us more isolated than ever despite being technically connected. What unites these diverse interpretations, from Bruegel's oil paints to a sci-fi novelist's prose, is their critical lens on power. Artists consistently use the Babel motif to question the imposing structures of their own time, be they political empires, industrial complexes, or the architectures of the internet. An expert in art history might point out that these works are rarely simple illustrations of a Bible story. They are active, subversive commentaries. They ask who benefits from grand projects of unification and who gets left behind in the resulting fragmentation. This enduring artistic conversation proves that the Tower of Babel is not a static relic from the past, but a living, evolving story. It is a framework we continually use to process our own world, a timeless myth that helps us define our own identities and understand our place in an increasingly complex society. Now consider how a single ancient story can become the bedrock for an entire nation's sense of self. From the rolling hills of Eastern Europe to the bustling cities of the Americas, the Tower of Babel has been adopted and adapted to explain why we are different from one another. This narrative provides a powerful origin story for national and ethnic identities, offering a divine explanation for the world's beautiful and often troubling diversity. It answers a fundamental human question: why do those people over there speak differently, look different, and live differently than we do? The story suggests it was not random chance but a pivotal event that scattered us and gave us our unique tongues. This idea has been used for centuries to reinforce cultural boundaries and at times to justify them. In the hands of nationalist movements, the tale can be twisted into a tool for exclusion. It is used to promote the idea of linguistic purity, suggesting that a nation's identity is intrinsically tied to a single, uncorrupted language, a direct descendant from before the Great Scattering. This rhetoric often surfaces in heated debates over immigration and cultural assimilation, where new languages and customs are seen as a modern-day corruption of a sacred, unified past. Political leaders might invoke the image of Babel to warn against the dangers of multiculturalism, arguing that too many languages within a border leads to societal confusion and a loss of national purpose. The story becomes a cautionary tale against returning to a state of chaotic division, thus promoting policies that favor homogeneity. Conversely, for diaspora communities scattered far from their ancestral homelands, the Babel story can be a source of profound cultural pride and resilience. It reframes their scattered existence not as a punishment but as a part of a shared human destiny. The different language they speak at home, the traditions they maintain, these become direct links to an ancient past, a unique thread in the human tapestry woven from the events at Babel. In this way, the narrative helps foster a strong sense of identity and continuity against the pressures of assimilation. Religious schools within these communities often teach the story to reinforce group cohesion, emphasizing that their distinctiveness is part of a larger divine plan. Scholar Anthony D. Smith explored this concept deeply in his work on ethno-symbolism, which examines how myths, symbols, and memories are the essential glue that holds nations together. He argued that nations are not just political constructs, but are built on a foundation of shared stories that give meaning to a community's past and destiny. The Tower of Babel is a prime example of such a story. It provides a powerful symbol of a lost unity and a subsequent fragmentation that defines the modern world. This myth helps people feel they belong to something ancient and meaningful, a community with a shared history that stretches back to the very dawn of civilization. So we must ask ourselves, how do the stories we tell about our origins shape who we are today? Do the narratives you grew up with, whether rooted in religion, history, or family lore, make you feel more connected to a specific group or more separate from others? It is worth reflecting on whether these powerful origin stories ultimately build bridges of understanding between people, or if they more often draw lines in the sand, creating insiders and outsiders. This examination shows us that the Tower of Babel is far more than a simple legend. It is a versatile tool used in the ongoing and often contentious process of building collective memory and identity. And to truly understand its weight, we must look for its foundations not just in text, but in the very earth beneath our feet. Imagine standing on a dusty plain in modern-day Iraq, where the heat shimmers over ancient ruins. This is the land where history whispers from beneath the sand, where archaeologists have spent decades carefully unearthing the remains of a culture that may have given birth to the Tower of Babel legend. While we will never find a signpost pointing to the exact tower from Genesis, we can explore the monumental structures that likely inspired it. The great ziggurates of Mesopotamia, like the Etemenanki in Babylon, were massive stepped pyramids that reached for the heavens, serving as both temples and symbols of a king's divine authority. They were the skyscrapers of their day, central to the city's identity and religious life. Cuneiform tablets, etched with careful script, describe these ambitious construction projects. One famous tablet even details a story where the gods grow angry at humanity for some unnamed transgression and decide to scatter them, a striking parallel to the biblical account. Biblical archaeologists like Israel Finkelstein help us navigate the delicate space between faith and fact. Their work does not seek to prove or disprove the Bible, but to understand the world that produced its stories. They suggest that the Tale of Babel was likely a powerful piece of theological commentary from the Israelites, perhaps composed during their exile in Babylon. Looking up at the immense, imposing ziggurates of their captors, they might have crafted a story that turned this symbol of Babylonian power on its head. In their version, such prideful ambition does not lead to glory but to divine judgment and fragmentation. This interpretation transforms the narrative from a simple myth into a profound act of resistance, using a familiar Mesopotamian motif to make a statement about their own god's supremacy and the dangers of human arrogance. This archaeological perspective invites us to consider how all our ancient stories are woven. They are not written in a vacuum but are threads pulled from the rich tapestry of contemporary events, cultural anxieties, and physical surroundings. The mud bricks and baked clay of Babylonian construction, a detail mentioned in the Bible, ground the story in a tangible reality familiar to its first audiences. By separating potential historical kernels from the moral and theological lessons built upon them, we do not diminish the story's power. Instead, we gain a deeper appreciation for the genius of its construction, how a real-world setting was masterfully used to explore timeless ideas about power, unity, and the human condition. So, what do you think? How does knowing about the possible real-world inspirations for Babel change the way you hear the story? Does it make it more relatable, knowing it might have been born from a very human experience of oppression and the need to find meaning in a vast and often intimidating world? The dust of archaeology helps to ground our soaring myths, connecting them to the very earth we walk on. Now consider the very nature of human society itself, a grand experiment in how we organize ourselves. The story of Babel presents us with a profound philosophical puzzle, a question that has echoed through the ages from ancient forums to modern think tanks. Is our greatest strength found in our unity, a single shared purpose that allows us to achieve the impossible, or does it lie in our beautiful, messy diversity, the countless perspectives that fuel innovation and creativity? The tower's initial construction showcases the raw power of a homogeneous society, everyone moving in lockstep with a common language and a common goal. They nearly reach the heavens, but then that forced fragmentation, while seemingly a punishment, also sows the seeds for a different kind of human flourishing, one built on a mosaic of cultures, traditions, and ways of seeing the world. This tension is at the heart of many great philosophical debates. The German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel saw history as a dialectical process, a constant push and pull between a thesis and its opposing antithesis, eventually giving birth to a new synthesis. In this light, Babel is a perfect allegory. The thesis is absolute unity, the antithesis is enforced diversity, and perhaps our modern global society, with all its struggles and triumphs, is the ongoing synthesis, constantly trying to reconcile these two forces. Then there is John Stuart Mill, the champion of individual liberty, who argued vehemently for the value of dissent and variety. He warned that a society which suppresses difference in the name of conformity becomes stagnant, intellectually barren. The confusion of languages, from Mill's perspective, while disruptive, inadvertently guaranteed a future where no single idea could completely dominate all others, protecting humanity from a different kind of tyranny, the tyranny of a single thought. We can see these competing ideals play out in political structures throughout history. Vast centralized empires, from Rome to the colonial powers, often imposed a single administrative language and legal system, seeking to create a unified, manageable whole. This is the pre-Babel model, efficiency at the cost of assimilation. In contrast, federated states or the modern European Union attempt a more delicate dance, celebrating regional differences and multiple languages while building shared economic and political frameworks. This is the post-Babel challenge, managing complexity for the sake of pluralism. The philosopher Quame Anthony Appiah speaks of cosmopolitanism, the idea that we have obligations to all human beings beyond our local tribe or nation. He advocates for a world where we can appreciate both our shared humanity and our distinct cultural identities, a vision that tries to honor both the ambition of the tower and the reality of the scattering. So where does that leave us in our own communities? Is the ideal a melting pot where differences blend into a new whole, or a mosaic where each unique piece contributes to a grander picture? The Tower of Babel does not give us an easy answer, and perhaps that is its greatest wisdom. It simply presents the consequences of both extremes, leaving us to navigate the vast and complicated middle ground. It asks us to consider what we might be willing to sacrifice for perfect understanding, and what we might gain from the inevitable misunderstandings. How do we build collective strength without crushing individual expression? How do we celebrate diversity without building walls between us? This ancient story frames our most contemporary dilemmas, proving that the politics of communication is at its core a philosophy of human connection. Imagine a thriving ancient marketplace, a whirlwind of activity where merchants from distant lands once bartered and sold their wares with ease. Now picture that same hub of commerce falling into chaos, as the shared language that made it all possible suddenly fractures into a dozen incomprehensible dialects. Deals collapse, orders are misunderstood, and valuable goods sit idle because no one can agree on a price or a plan. This is the immediate economic shockwave following the event at Babel, a stark illustration of how communication is the absolute lifeblood of trade and cooperation. When that vital channel is severed, the cost of doing business doesn't just rise, it can become completely prohibitive. This ancient scenario finds a direct parallel in our modern global economy. Every time a contract requires professional translation, a company localizes its software for a new market, or a multinational team schedules a meeting to untangle a simple misunderstanding, we are paying what economists call a transaction cost. These are the hidden taxes imposed by our post-Babel world, the financial friction that slows down progress and eats into potential profits. The role of a lingua franca, a common bridge language, becomes incredibly valuable in this fractured landscape. Throughout history, languages like Koine Greek in the ancient Mediterranean, Latin in medieval Europe, and now English in global business have dramatically reduced these transaction costs. They grease the wheels of commerce, allowing for smoother negotiations, clearer contracts, and more efficient supply chains. A company based in Seoul can seamlessly work with a factory in Vietnam and a distributor in Brazil if all parties share a common operational language. This efficiency creates immense economic advantages, fostering international trade and innovation on a scale the original tower builders could never have imagined. However, this reliance on a dominant language also creates a powerful economic hierarchy. Nations and individuals fluent in the global lingua franca enjoy privileged access to opportunities, investment, and networks, while those who are not can find themselves sidelined or forced to invest significant resources just to catch up. This dynamic can exacerbate global inequalities, creating a world where your economic potential is partly determined by your linguistic background. Yet, linguistic diversity itself is not purely an economic burden. It can be a tremendous source of local wealth and cultural capital. Consider the economic ecosystem that flourishes around a unique language. It supports translators, language teachers, and cultural consultants. It creates markets for uniquely local literature, music, and film that would not exist in a homogenized world. A region's distinct cultural identity, often encoded in its language, can be a powerful draw for tourism and a unique selling point for its artisan goods and crafts. The challenge, then, is not to eliminate diversity but to navigate its economic complexities. How does a society preserve the rich cultural and local economic benefits of its native tongue while still plugging into the vast opportunities of the global market? It is a delicate balancing act between celebrating the unique and embracing the universal. We can find a brilliant historical model for managing this balance in the ancient Silk Road. This sprawling network of trade routes connected cultures from China to the Mediterranean, encompassing countless languages and dialects. The entire system would have collapsed under the weight of its own linguistic diversity were it not for multilingual intermediaries. Sogdian merchants, for instance, became legendary for their role as cultural and linguistic translators, facilitating deals between the Chinese, Persians, and others. They were the human antidote to Babel's curse, proving that cooperation doesn't require everyone to speak the same language, but rather relies on the crucial skills of translation and cultural mediation. Their success shows that economic prosperity in a divided world depends on building bridges, not just imposing a single lane of communication. Today, digital technology promises to be our modern-day Sogdian merchant. Artificial intelligence translation apps, real-time transcription services, and collaborative online platforms are breaking down barriers at an unprecedented pace. A small business owner in a remote village can now use a smartphone to negotiate with a supplier overseas, something that was unthinkable just a generation ago. These tools are democratizing access to the global marketplace, potentially reducing the economic disadvantage of not speaking a dominant language. But are these technologies truly closing the gap, or are they creating new ones? While they offer amazing tools for basic communication, they often struggle with nuance, cultural context, and the subtle art of building trust that is so essential for major business deals. Furthermore, the algorithms themselves can inherit biases, and access to the best, most accurate digital translation tools often comes with a premium price tag, potentially creating a new digital divide. The fundamental question remains, as we deploy these new technologies, are we building a more inclusive global economy, or are we simply constructing a new, more high-tech tower with its own set of gatekeepers? But the story of Babel does not stand alone in the annals of human imagination. It is part of a magnificent global chorus of myths, each culture composing its own verse to explain a world divided by language. Consider the ancient Greek tale of the Alode giants Otus and Ephialtes. These colossal brothers, in their incredible arrogance, decided to pile 3 mountains, Mount Ossa on top of Mount Olympus, and then Mount Pelion on top of Ossa, in a reckless attempt to storm the home of the gods and claim it for themselves. Their story echoes Babel's core theme of towering ambition challenging divine authority, and while their punishment was being tricked into killing each other rather than a confusion of tongues, the message is strikingly similar. The gods will not tolerate such a direct assault on their domain. Venture to the other side of the world, and you find the Wasco people of the Pacific Northwest in North America. Their tradition tells of a time when a great deluge covered the earth. As the waters finally receded, the survivors found themselves gathered on a single mountain peak, much like the plain of Shinar. In the aftermath, a profound confusion fell upon the people. They could no longer understand each other's speech, and from that moment, the different tribes and their distinct languages were born, scattering to populate the renewed world. Here, the fragmentation is not a punishment for sin, but a natural, almost organic consequence of a cataclysm, a way to explain the repopulation and cultural diversification of the continents. This pattern repeats itself across the globe. In southern Africa, a Basotho legend from Lesotho describes a time of severe famine. The people, in their desperation, decided to disperse to find food. As they parted ways, their language gradually changed until they could no longer comprehend one another, weaving the origin of linguistic diversity into a narrative of survival and adaptation to hardship. In Asia, a Karen tradition from Myanmar and Thailand speaks of a mythical golden book that contained all knowledge and a magical gourd that produced limitless rice. When humans began to fight over these divine gifts, the book was lost and the gourd ceased to function. In the ensuing chaos and conflict, the single human language was shattered into many, connecting the loss of universal understanding to a fall from a golden age of plenty and harmony. What is it about this specific story that resonates so deeply across such different landscapes and cultures? The renowned scholar of comparative mythology, Joseph Campbell, would likely point to this as a powerful example of the monomyth, a universal story pattern that speaks to a fundamental human experience. The theme of a primordial unity, a time when humanity shared a common purpose and a common tongue, appears again and again. This is followed by a catalytic event, often rooted in human hubris or a transgression against a natural or divine order. The consequence is almost always a fall from grace, a fragmentation that introduces the challenges of diversity, conflict, and misunderstanding that define the human condition as we know it. These myths are not mere ancient curiosities. They are profound attempts to answer the most pressing questions of human existence. Why do we fight? Why can't we always understand our neighbors? Why is the world so beautifully and sometimes frustratingly varied? By crafting these narratives, our ancestors were trying to make sense of the complicated world they inherited. The specific details changed to reflect local values and environments: a tower in Mesopotamia, mountains in Greece, a flood in the Pacific Northwest, a lost bounty in Southeast Asia, but the underlying psychological and existential inquiry remains constant. These stories provided a framework for understanding the other, for justifying the known borders of a tribe or nation, and for encoding a moral lesson about the dangers of overreaching ambition. This global tapestry invites us to look inward at our own cultural heritage. What stories did your ancestors tell to explain the diversity of the world? Perhaps there is a local folk tale, a family legend, or a cultural parable that serves a similar purpose. Reflecting on these narratives reveals something fundamental about our shared human nature, our deep-seated need to find order in chaos, to assign meaning to difference, and to use the power of story to navigate the complexities of society. Seeing Babel not as an isolated biblical account, but as one thread in this vast, interconnected web of human storytelling, enriches its meaning tremendously. It transforms it from a singular event into a shared chapter in the collective story of humanity, a testament to our universal yearning to explain our world and our place within it. Imagine a high school history teacher writing that single word, Babel, on the whiteboard. The immediate reaction is often a few students reciting the simplified version they heard as children, a story about God making everyone speak different languages. But then the teacher asks a simple, powerful question: What if that is not what the story is actually about? This is where the classroom transforms into a laboratory for ethical reasoning. Educators use this ancient narrative not to indoctrinate but to provoke. They guide students to look past the surface and ask whose ambition was being served by building that tower. Was it a collective effort for communal safety, or a monolithic project imposed by a powerful few seeking to make a name for themselves? This shift in perspective turns a mythological tale into a sharp tool for analyzing modern megaprojects, corporate branding, and political campaigns. It forces young minds to consider the complex motivations behind any human endeavor that seeks to unite people under a single, grand goal. In subjects like philosophy or secular ethics, the Tower of Babel becomes a foundational case study for discussions on hubris. Teachers might pair it with the Greek myth of Icarus or the modern story of Frankenstein. Students are tasked with defining the line between healthy ambition, which drives innovation, and dangerous overreach, which can lead to ethical collapse or environmental disaster. A powerful exercise involves role-playing the scattering. One half of the class must continue building with a new, made-up language, while the other half observes the frustration and ingenuity that arises from this forced separation. This simulation does more than teach about ancient events. It creates a lived experience of miscommunication, fostering a deep, empathetic understanding of what immigrants or non-native speakers might feel daily. It makes the abstract painfully, personally real. The value of this approach is championed by educational theorists who argue that narratives are the most effective way to develop critical thinking and moral reasoning. As one prominent educator noted, stories like Babel provide a safe container to explore dangerous ideas. They allow students to confront themes of power, punishment, and division from a distance, which then gives them the vocabulary and framework to analyze contemporary issues. A student might first debate whether God's intervention was just in the story, and then be guided to a discussion on whether a government's decision to suppress a protest is ever justified. The story provides the ancient mirror in which we see our modern reflections. A crucial challenge and a skill for modern educators is teaching this narrative inclusively. In a diverse classroom with students from various religious and cultural backgrounds, the story cannot be presented as historical fact. Instead, it is framed as a powerful myth, one of many from around the world that attempt to explain the same human condition. A teacher might present the Basutu legend from Africa or the Wasco tradition from North America alongside the biblical account, showing how different cultures have wrestled with the same question of why we speak different languages. This method validates all cultural heritages while extracting universal values everyone can discuss, such as the importance of humility, the consequences of arrogance, and the undeniable strength found in diversity. So, what are the ultimate takeaways? What moral lessons cling to the bricks of this fallen tower? The story serves as a timeless warning against the idolatry of unity. It suggests that a forced, monolithic culture where everyone thinks and speaks the same is not only impossible but undesirable. The true lesson may be that our goal should not be to rebuild a single tower, but to build bridges between our many beautiful, scattered towns. It teaches the value of listening, the skill of translation, and the courage required to understand someone who sees the world through a completely different linguistic lens. If you were to teach this story, what would you emphasize? Would you focus on the ambition that built the tower or the confusion that followed? Would you frame the scattering as a punishment or as the beginning of our rich global tapestry of cultures? The answers to these questions themselves reveal our own values, and that is the ultimate power of this story in education. It does not give answers, but forever compels us to ask better questions. Picture a government decree issued in a grand hall. declaring that from this day forward, only one language may be used in schools, courts, and public life. This act, often framed as a necessity for national unity, is a modern echo of the pre-Babel world, a deliberate attempt to recreate that singular linguistic harmony. Yet this enforced unity always comes at a cost, threatening to silence the rich chorus of minority tongues and the cultural histories they carry. The story of the Tower of Babel is not merely an ancient myth. It is a profound commentary on the politics of language, a timeless narrative that sheds light on how states have always used communication as a tool to consolidate power, shape national identity, and manage or suppress dissent. Consider the historical example of France, a nation that has long pursued a policy of strict linguistic uniformity. For centuries, the French government actively suppressed regional languages like Breton, Occitan, and Alsatian in a concerted effort to forge a singular French identity from a diverse population. Speaking these languages in schools was often met with punishment, a direct method of ensuring that the central government's voice was the only one that mattered. This top-down control mirrors the divine imposition of language in Babel, though with a very human authority asserting its will. The goal was unity and administrative efficiency, but the effect was the marginalization of unique cultural identities and the erosion of a valuable part of France's heritage. In stark contrast, a nation like India presents a fascinatingly complex multilingual model. With 22 officially recognized languages and hundreds of dialects, its constitution attempts a delicate balancing act. Rather than imposing a single tongue, the Indian system aims for a pragmatic unity amidst incredible diversity. Hindi and English serve as linking languages for federal administration, while states have the autonomy to operate in their own official languages. This approach acknowledges the deep connection between language, regional identity, and political participation. However, it is not without its own tensions. Debates periodically flare over the perceived dominance of Hindi, revealing how even a system designed to accommodate diversity can become a battleground for linguistic power struggles, echoing the post-Babel competition between newly formed groups. The consequences of these policies are never abstract. When a government enforces a single official language, it directly controls who can participate fully in society. Access to education, legal representation, and political office becomes tethered to linguistic fluency. Communities that speak a marginalized language can find themselves locked out of economic opportunities and unable to advocate for their rights within the system. Sociolinguists point to this as a primary mechanism of disenfranchisement, where language laws become a subtle but powerful tool for maintaining the status quo and quieting dissent. It is a form of control that is less visible than a soldier with a weapon, but can be equally effective in silencing voices and homogenizing thought. But just as the scattering at Babel was not a final defeat, these acts of linguistic control often spark powerful movements of resistance and revitalization. Across the globe, communities are fighting to reclaim their linguistic heritage. In Wales, decades of activism have led to a remarkable revival of the Welsh language, now taught in schools and used on official signage, a vibrant testament to cultural resilience. Similarly, in Hawaii, there has been a dedicated movement to bring the Hawaiian language back from the brink of extinction through immersion schools and community programs. These efforts are not merely about preserving words and grammar, they are profound political acts. They represent a bottom-up reclamation of identity and a direct challenge to centralized, homogenizing power structures, asserting the right to be understood in one's own tongue. This forces us to confront a critical question that resonates from ancient Babel to our modern world. How do we strike a balance between the practical need for common languages that enable a society to function and the fundamental right of people to speak the language of their home and heart? Is unity only achievable through uniformity, or can it be forged through a respectful embrace of diversity? The answer often lies in policies that promote multilingualism rather than enforced monolingualism, creating a public sphere where a common language exists for official purposes without extinguishing the rich, diverse languages of the home and community. This approach recognizes that true unity is not about everyone being the same, but about building bridges of understanding between different people. In this light, the legacy of Babel is not just a curse of confusion, but an enduring lesson in the ongoing political struggle over who gets to speak and who is forced to listen. Now picture a negotiation table where two sides sit in stony silence, not out of anger, but because they literally cannot understand one another. This is the stark reality of conflict when communication fails, a modern embodiment of the Babel story's central tragedy. The narrative is far more than an origin myth for different languages. It serves as a powerful framework for understanding the very mechanics of strife and the fragile path toward peace. When words lose their shared meaning, suspicion flourishes and simple disagreements can escalate into intractable disputes. The story teaches us that conflict is often born not from irreconcilable differences, but from a fundamental breakdown in the ability to connect, to share a common reality. This ancient insight is remarkably relevant for modern peacebuilders who see the restoration of dialogue as the first and most crucial step in healing divisions. We can see this chillingly illustrated in historical conflicts where language barriers acted as accelerants to violence. Consider the Rwandan genocide. While the roots of the conflict were deeply political and ethnic, the fact that the population was divided between Kinyarwanda and French speakers created a tangible chasm. Propaganda broadcast on radio stations was often framed within a specific linguistic context, making it harder for some communities to access counter-narratives or calls for calm. The inability to communicate across groups made it easier to dehumanize the other and allowed misinformation to spread with deadly efficiency. Similarly, in the Balkans, the fracturing of the Serbo-Croatian language into distinct Serbian, Croatian, and Bosnian standards was both a symptom and a cause of the bloody dissolution of Yugoslavia. Deliberate linguistic differentiation became a political tool to reinforce new national identities built on separation and mutual hostility, turning former neighbors into strangers who spoke quite literally different languages. Yet, just as Babel provides a diagnosis, it also suggests a cure. If confusion is the illness, then facilitated understanding is the treatment. This is the foundation of peacebuilding work pioneered by thinkers like Johann Galtung. He distinguishes between negative peace, which is simply the absence of visible violence, and positive peace, which involves the active building of relationships, institutions, and attitudes that sustain reconciliation. Achieving positive peace requires dismantling the towers of miscommunication. This work is embodied by translators and interpreters on the front lines of diplomacy, whose careful work ensures that nuanced meanings are not lost. It is seen in community mediation programs that bring conflicting parties together in a safe, neutral space with a facilitator who ensures everyone is truly heard. These facilitators act as modern-day anti-Babel forces, not by restoring a single language, but by building a new, shared one of mutual respect and empathy. The principles derived from this ancient story are not confined to international diplomacy. They resonate powerfully in our own daily lives. How many of our personal conflicts with family members, co-workers, or friends begin with a simple misunderstanding that spirals out of control because we failed to truly listen or to make ourselves clearly understood? We all build small, personal towers of Babel when we assume our intentions are obvious, when we use jargon or coded language that excludes others, or when we let anger dictate our words. The call to action from this story is deeply personal. It invites us to become peace builders in our own circles by consciously choosing clarity over confusion, by asking clarifying questions instead of making assumptions, and by striving to hear the meaning behind someone's words rather than just the words themselves. It challenges us to translate not between languages but between perspectives, finding the common ground that lies beneath our surface-level differences. In this way, the story transforms from an ancient tale of punishment into a timeless manual for human connection, reminding us that the most enduring structures we can build are not towers of ambition, but bridges of understanding. Now imagine a world where the confusion of Babel is not a divine act, but something we are building ourselves line of code by line of code. We stand at the precipice of a new era where artificial intelligence promises to tear down language barriers, offering instant, seamless translation at our fingertips. This digital Tower of Babel could theoretically unite humanity in a way not seen since the plains of Shinar, creating a global conversation without misunderstandings. But this powerful tool comes with profound ethical questions that echo the oldest politics of communication. Who controls these algorithms? What biases are woven into their digital fabric? And could this technological marvel, instead of connecting us, ultimately deepen our divisions and create new forms of inequality? Consider the reality of machine translation. A service like Google Translate is used billions of times a day, shaping how people across the globe understand each other. Yet these systems are not neutral. They are trained on vast datasets of existing human language, which means they can inherit and even amplify our prejudices. For instance, early AI translators often exhibited gender bias, consistently associating certain professions with a specific gender based on outdated stereotypes found in their training data. When translating a gender-neutral sentence from Turkish into English, the algorithm might automatically assume a doctor is a he and a nurse is a she, hard-coding societal biases into seemingly objective results. This is a subtle but powerful form of control, where a handful of tech companies essentially get to decide how ideas are framed and transferred across cultures, potentially flattening nuance and reinforcing harmful stereotypes on a global scale. The loss of linguistic nuance is another critical concern. Languages are not just different sets of words for the same things, they are entire ecosystems of thought, carrying unique cultural concepts, humor, and history that often resist direct translation. The Finnish word sisu, embodying a spirit of stoic determination, or the Portuguese saudade, a deep emotional state of nostalgic longing, can be explained in English but never fully captured. When we rely solely on AI to mediate our conversations, we risk reducing rich, complex ideas to their simplest common denominator, creating a homogenized global dialect that erases the very diversity that makes human thought so vibrant. We might achieve communication, but at the cost of true understanding, creating a shallow unity that masks deeper cultural erosion. Perhaps the most alarming parallel to the Babel story is the concentration of power. The massive computational resources and data required to train these AI models are controlled by a very small number of massive corporations. This gives them unprecedented influence over the flow of global information. They decide which languages are supported and which are left behind, often prioritizing economically valuable languages over smaller, indigenous ones. This creates a new digital divide where speakers of marginalized languages are further excluded from the global conversation. Furthermore, the same technology that can translate language can also be weaponized to manipulate it. Deepfake technology and AI-generated text can create convincing lies, fake news, and propaganda at an unprecedented scale and speed, potentially confusing our shared reality more thoroughly than any biblical event. As ethicists like Timnit Gebru have warned, without transparency and equitable development, we risk building a system where control over communication is centralized, creating a modern Babel not of confusion, but of manipulation and control. This forces us to confront a vital question. How do we govern this technology to ensure it serves humanity rather than divides it? The answer lies in demanding transparency in how these algorithms are built, advocating for diverse teams of engineers and linguists to design them, and creating robust regulatory frameworks that prioritize ethical considerations over pure profit. The goal should not be a single, universal language imposed by AI, but a world where technology helps us appreciate and navigate our beautiful diversity without imposing a new hierarchy. The story of Babel is no longer just an ancient myth. It is an urgent cautionary tale, reminding us that the power to shape how we communicate is the power to shape society itself. Our challenge is to ensure that in our rush to build a digital tower, we do not recreate the very scattering we seek to overcome. Visualize the tower not merely as bricks and mortar reaching for the heavens, but as a profound declaration of ownership over the very earth beneath it. This structure was a claim on space, a consumption of resources, and a bold statement about humanity's relationship with the natural world. When we read the story through an ecological lens, the Tower of Babel transforms into an ancient cautionary tale about unsustainable development and the hidden costs of unchecked ambition. The builders, united in their single-minded purpose, were likely so focused on their celestial goal that they ignored the earthly consequences of their project. The sheer scale of such an endeavor would have demanded vast quantities of timber, fired bricks, and bitumen for mortar, placing immense strain on local forests, water sources, and clay pits. This concentrated urban development, while a testament to human collaboration, would have generated significant waste and pollution, altering the local environment in ways its creators may have never considered. We can see this pattern echoed in the very cities that likely inspired the tale. Ancient Babylon, a marvel of engineering with its towering ziggurats and legendary hanging gardens, still faced immense challenges of sustainability. Supporting a dense urban population required sophisticated irrigation to bring water from the Euphrates River, a system that could lead to soil salinization and reduced agricultural yields over time. The city's grandeur was built on a foundation of resource extraction that reached far beyond its walls, creating a footprint that stretched across the region. Experts in environmental history point out that this is a recurring theme. Human ambition consistently overlooks ecological limits. We build magnificent structures and thriving metropolises, often forgetting that we are part of a larger natural order, not separate from it. The drive to conquer and reshape our environment can blind us to the delicate balances that sustain life itself. This narrative finds a powerful parallel in our modern world with the rise of megacities. Places like Jakarta, Mexico City, and Lagos are monuments to human congregation and economic ambition, yet they grapple with crippling pollution, water scarcity, and the immense logistical challenge of waste management. The very concentration of people and industry that makes them hubs of innovation also creates intense environmental strain, from blankets of smog to rivers choked with plastic. The story of Babel asks us to consider the price of our collective aspirations. What are we sacrificing in our relentless push toward progress? Are we, like the ancient builders, risking a different kind of downfall, one driven not by divine intervention, but by ecological collapse? The scattering that follows the confusion of language introduces another fascinating environmental dimension, the spatial politics of dispersal. When humanity was forced to migrate and settle across the globe, they encountered and adapted to a breathtaking array of diverse landscapes. This dispersal fostered an incredible richness of biodiversity as different groups learned to live in harmony with their unique local environments, developing agricultural practices, architectural styles, and cultural traditions suited to specific terrains and climates. In one sense, this fragmentation was a boon for the planet's ecological variety. However, this same scattering also set the stage for widespread habitat loss. As each newly formed population grew and expanded its territory, the cumulative human impact on the globe multiplied. Forests were cleared for settlements, grasslands were plowed for farms, and ecosystems were reshaped to meet human needs across every continent. This duality forces us to confront a complex question about our place in the world. How do we balance our need to build and innovate with our responsibility to steward and preserve? The Tower of Babel does not offer a simple answer, but it provides a framework for understanding this eternal tension. It encourages us to look at our own environmental footprints and to consider how urban planning and development can learn from its ancient lessons. Perhaps the true wisdom lies not in abandoning our towers, but in building them with a deeper awareness of the ground upon which they stand and the sky they seek to touch. This reflection on our physical relationship with the world naturally leads us to consider a more intimate consequence of the Babel event, the profound psychological impact of being suddenly isolated by language, unable to connect with the people and places around you. Now imagine the sheer disorientation and profound loneliness that would follow that moment of divine intervention when a single shared language shattered into countless fragments. A person who moments before was collaborating effortlessly with a neighbor on laying the next brick suddenly finds the other's speech an incomprehensible stream of alien sounds. The psychological impact of such sudden and complete linguistic isolation is difficult to overstate. It is a severing of the most fundamental human connection, the ability to share a thought, a need, or a feeling. This post-Babel scattering is not just a physical migration, it is a deep psychological rupture. The individuals in this story would have experienced a profound sense of alienation, suddenly becoming outsiders in their own community, unable to participate in the collective project that had given their lives purpose and meaning. This forced isolation attacks the very core of our identity, as so much of who we are is built and reinforced through communication with others. Modern psychology offers a clear window into this kind of experience through the study of language deprivation. Consider the poignant case of immigrants arriving in a new country with no knowledge of the local language. The initial excitement can quickly give way to feelings of anxiety, frustration, and a deep-seated loneliness. Everyday tasks like shopping for groceries or asking for directions become monumental challenges, eroding confidence and fostering a sense of helplessness. Over time, this constant struggle can contribute to depression and social withdrawal. Similarly, research on deaf children who are not exposed to a rich language environment early in life, whether sign language or spoken, shows significant long-term effects on cognitive development, social skills, and overall mental well-being. The neurologist and author Oliver Sacks wrote powerfully about this, observing that language is not merely a tool for communication, but the very medium through which we construct our inner worlds and our sense of self. To be deprived of full access to this medium is to be isolated in a prison of one's own mind, watching the world converse through a soundproof glass. Yet, the human spirit possesses a remarkable capacity for resilience in the face of such fragmentation. The same story that gives us the lesson of division also subtly hints at the path to reintegration. Those scattered groups, though now speaking different languages, did not simply vanish. They formed new communities, developed new cultures, and found ways to rebuild a shared understanding from the ground up. This mirrors the resilient strategies we see today. People isolated by language barriers often seek out others who share their mother tongue, creating supportive subcultures that become a psychological lifeline, a place where they can be fully understood. Others embark on the challenging but rewarding journey of learning a new language, a process that is about far more than memorizing vocabulary. It is an act of cognitive and emotional expansion, a bridge-building exercise that slowly dismantles the walls of isolation. This exploration of the inner world of those at Babel does more than just add another layer to an ancient myth. It humanizes them. They cease to be abstract characters in a divine morality play and become relatable people experiencing a terrifying and isolating event. Their story becomes a powerful mirror for contemporary issues of mental well-being, reminding us that communication barriers are not always about different native languages. They can exist between generations within a family, between different social groups, or even between individuals with conflicting perspectives. The essential human need to be heard and understood remains universal. Reflecting on this, we might ask ourselves how often we contribute to someone else's feeling of isolation through our own impatience or unwillingness to listen. And perhaps more importantly, how can we actively become bridge builders in our own communities, creating spaces of inclusivity where everyone has a voice and the tools to be understood? Perhaps no modern film captures the haunting beauty and profound challenge of the Babel story better than the 2016 masterpiece, Arrival. It presents us with a scenario that is, in many ways, the inverse of the ancient myth. Instead of a divine force shattering a single language into many, we have humanity confronted by the arrival of alien beings whose mode of communication is utterly incomprehensible. The heptapods do not speak or write in a linear fashion. Their circular, symbolic language is a reflection of their non-linear perception of time. The central drama of the film is not about building a tower to reach the heavens, but about building a bridge of understanding to avert a global war. The linguist protagonist, Dr. Louise Banks, must literally rewire her own brain to think in a new way to comprehend their language, and in doing so, she unlocks a new perception of reality itself. Arrival brilliantly reframes the Babel event not as a punishment, but as a difficult yet necessary step toward a greater, almost transcendent form of communication. It suggests that true unity might not come from everyone speaking the same language, but from the immense effort required to truly understand another. Science fiction television has also repeatedly turned to these themes, using the friction of miscommunication to drive narrative tension and social commentary. An episode of the long-running series Doctor Who, titled The Impossible Planet, features a malevolent entity that speaks every language simultaneously, creating a cacophony of fear that preys on the diverse crew of a space station. Here, the confusion of Babel is weaponized, a tool of psychological warfare that highlights how our deepest fears are often rooted in a failure to comprehend. Another series, The Expanse, builds its entire political universe on the consequences of linguistic and cultural drift. The Belters, humans born and raised in the asteroid belt, develop their own Creole language and a distinct cultural identity separate from Earth and Mars. Their struggle for recognition and sovereignty is fought as much over the right to their own language and customs as it is over resources, echoing the real-world political struggles of countless earthbound cultures throughout history. These stories use the sci-fi lens to ask what new forms of Babel might emerge as humanity expands, and what new conflicts will arise from them. The world of video games offers an even more immersive way to experience the frustration and triumph of overcoming communication barriers. Many puzzle games are, at their core, about deciphering an unknown language. Games like Myst or Heaven's Vault task the player with slowly piecing together ancient alphabets and grammatical structures from environmental clues and context. The player directly engages in the painstaking archaeological work of rebuilding understanding from fragments, feeling the immense satisfaction of cracking a code that allows them to progress. This interactive experience translates the abstract concept of linguistic discovery into a tangible, personal achievement. Furthermore, massively multiplayer online games create living laboratories for modern Babel-like dynamics. When players from North America, Europe, and Asia converge in a virtual world like Final Fantasy XIV or World of Warcraft, they must develop their own strategies for cooperation despite language differences. They might use simple shared icons, a handful of common words, or the universal language of gameplay mechanics themselves to achieve common goals, effectively building their own digital towers of collaboration. Experts in media studies point out that this enduring appeal is no accident. These pop culture interpretations act as a kind of collective therapy, allowing us to work through our deep-seated anxieties about technology, globalization, and the erosion of identity in a safe, fictional space. A dystopian story where a corporation controls a universal translator, for instance, directly channels our fears about the power of tech giants like Google or Meta over global discourse. A narrative about first contact with aliens allows us to rehearse how we might handle the ultimate cultural shock, exploring whether our first instinct would be toward paranoia or curiosity. By placing these ancient themes in futuristic settings, creators make them immediately relevant and deeply personal for a contemporary audience. They are not just retelling an old story, they are using its powerful framework to diagnose the present and speculate on the future. So, what is your favorite pop culture take on the Tower of Babel? Have you ever played a game or watched a show where a communication breakdown drove the entire plot? And what did it make you feel about your own ways of connecting with others? Now we turn our gaze upward to the silent, beckoning expanse of space. The Tower of Babel may be an ancient story rooted in the dust of Earth, but its themes are poised for a cosmic encore. As humanity stands on the precipice of becoming an interplanetary species, we are essentially preparing to build the ultimate tower, not of brick and tar, but of habitats and life support systems on distant worlds. And just as in the myth, this great scattering will inevitably reshape how we communicate. Imagine the first permanent settlement on Mars, a community sealed away under domes, separated from Earth by months of travel and minutes of communication delay. In that isolation, language will begin its slow, inexorable drift. New slang will emerge to describe the unique phenomena of their world, the rusty soil, the low gravity, the constant reliance on machinery. Over generations, a distinct Martian dialect will form, and with it, a new cultural identity. This isn't just speculation. Linguists who study what they call exolinguistics point to Earth's own history. When communities are isolated, their languages evolve independently. The difference with a space colony is that this isolation is absolute and enforced by the vacuum of space itself. They will develop their own idioms, their own accents, and their own ways of thinking that are subtly, then profoundly, different from those on Earth. This raises a fascinating political question. Will Earth seek to maintain linguistic control, insisting on a standard form of language to keep the colony tethered? Or will the Martians assert their linguistic independence, seeing their new mode of speech as a symbol of their self-reliance and unique experience. The politics of Babel will play out all over again, but this time on an interplanetary scale. This divergence could become even more extreme if we ever venture beyond our solar system. A generation ship traveling for centuries to a distant star would become a linguistic time capsule. The language spoken by the descendants of the original crew might be as unintelligible to Earth as English is to Old English. They might develop entirely new concepts for which we have no words, based on technologies or social structures we cannot yet imagine. In this scenario, the confusion of Babel wouldn't be an act of divine punishment, but a natural consequence of time and distance. Some scientists and science fiction writers have proposed a solution that echoes the pre-Babel unity, the creation of a constructed universal language, like a vastly more sophisticated Esperanto, designed for clarity and precision to serve as a lingua franca between worlds. Yet, even this solution is fraught with political danger. Who gets to design this language? Which Earth culture's logic and syntax would it favor? The very act of choosing a universal code could be seen as an act of cultural imperialism, a new tower built by one group attempting to reach a position of dominance over all others. This is where technology, particularly artificial intelligence, promises both a solution and a new set of problems. We might envision a future where sophisticated real-time translation earpieces or neural implants allow a Martian and an Earthling to converse as easily as neighbors. AI could seamlessly bridge the grammatical and cultural gaps, creating a perfect illusion of understanding. But this technological fix comes with its own set of Babel-like risks. If a handful of corporations or a single government controls the algorithms that facilitate all interplanetary communication, they would wield unprecedented power. They could theoretically censor, manipulate, or mistranslate, controlling the flow of information between worlds to serve their own ends. This digital Tower of Babel would not reach toward the heavens, but would instead be a system of control, determining who gets to speak and be understood. The divine intervention in this modern parable would be an algorithmic one, a line of code that confounds human speech not out of malice, but perhaps out of a programmed desire for efficiency or stability that overrides human nuance and dissent. Experts in astrosociology who study the social structures of spacefaring civilizations warn that we must establish ethical frameworks for communication technology now, before we find ourselves divided by more than just miles. The story of Babel teaches us that the scattering of people is often followed by the scattering of power. As we plant our flags on new worlds, will we choose to build bridges of open dialogue, or will we erect new towers that create even higher barriers to understanding? What kind of communication future do you envision for a multi-planetary humanity? And how can we ensure that our greatest adventure does not become a retelling of our oldest story of division? Think for a moment about a time you felt truly misunderstood. Maybe you were in a foreign country, struggling to ask for directions with a phrasebook and hand gestures. Perhaps it was during a difficult conversation with a loved one, where you both spoke the same language but somehow talked past each other, leaving a chasm of hurt feelings between you. Or maybe it was in a meeting at work where technical jargon and departmental silos created confusion instead of clarity. These are our personal, everyday Babels. They are moments where the tower of our intention crumbles, not because of divine intervention, but because of the simple human complexity of communication. The ancient story stops being a distant myth and becomes a mirror reflecting our own struggles to connect. This is the profound power of the Tower of Babel narrative. It is not just an explanation for why we speak different languages. It is a timeless framework for understanding the universal human experience of trying, and sometimes failing to be heard and understood. Every time we navigate a generational gap with a parent or a child, every time we try to bridge a political or cultural divide online, we are engaging with the same fundamental forces that the story describes. We are all, in our own ways, both the builders of towers and the inhabitants of a world scattered by confusion. I would love to hear how this story lands with you. In the comments, share your own anecdote about a communication breakdown you experienced and how you overcame it, or perhaps what you learned from it. What was your personal Babel moment? Let's create a living library of experiences right here, showing how this ancient text continues to speak to our modern lives. If you are looking for a deeper dive, try this journaling prompt. Write about a tower you are building in your own life, a project or a goal that requires collaboration. Then honestly assess the lines of communication supporting that effort. Are they clear and strong, or are there potential points of confusion that could cause the whole endeavor to stall? Another powerful exercise is to have a conversation with someone where your only goal is to understand their perspective, without the need to rebut or even respond. Just listen and see how that changes the dynamic. I was once told a story by a woman who moved to a new country. She said for the first 6 months, she felt like a ghost floating through a world of sound she could not decipher. Then one day, a shopkeeper patiently helped her pronounce the word for bread correctly. It was a tiny thing, but in that moment, a brick was laid. A small, humble bridge was built where a towering barrier once stood. Her story and yours are the most important part of this discussion, because the lesson of Babel is not that we are doomed to misunderstand each other. The lesson is that we must continually, consciously choose to build bridges. Think for a moment about a time you felt truly misunderstood. Maybe you were in a foreign country, struggling to ask for directions with a phrasebook and hand gestures. Perhaps it was during a difficult conversation with a loved one, where you both spoke the same language but somehow talked past each other, leaving a chasm of hurt feelings between you. Or maybe it was in a meeting at work where technical jargon and departmental silos created confusion instead of clarity. These are our personal, everyday Babels. They are moments where the tower of our intention crumbles, not because of divine intervention, but because of the simple, human complexity of communication. The ancient story stops being a distant myth and becomes a mirror reflecting our own struggles to connect. This is the profound power of the Tower of Babel narrative. It is not just an explanation for why we speak different languages. It is a timeless framework for understanding the universal human experience of trying, and sometimes failing, to be heard and understood. Every time we navigate a generational gap with a parent or a child, every time we try to bridge a political or cultural divide online, we are engaging with the same fundamental forces that the story describes. We are all, in our own ways, both the builders of towers and the inhabitants of a world scattered by confusion. I would love to hear how this story lands with you. In the comments, share your own anecdote about a communication breakdown you experienced and how you overcame it, or perhaps what you learned from it. What was your personal Babel moment? Let's create a living library of experiences right here, showing how this ancient text continues to speak to our modern lives. If you are looking for a deeper dive, try this journaling prompt. Write about a tower you are building in your own life, a project or a goal that requires collaboration. Then honestly assess the lines of communication supporting that effort. Are they clear and strong, or are there potential points of confusion that could cause the whole endeavor to stall? Another powerful exercise is to have a conversation with someone where your only goal is to understand their perspective, without the need to rebut or even respond. Just listen and see how that changes the dynamic. I was once told a story by a woman who moved to a new country. She said for the first 6 months, she felt like a ghost floating through a world of sound she could not decipher. Then one day, a shopkeeper patiently helped her pronounce the word for bread correctly. It was a tiny thing, but in that moment, a brick was laid. A small, humble bridge was built where a towering barrier once stood. Her story and yours are the most important part of this discussion, because the lesson of Babel is not that we are doomed to misunderstand each other. The lesson is that we must continually, consciously choose to build bridges,